Good evening, everyone. On behalf of Princeton University and the Office of the Dean of Undergraduate Students, we would like to welcome you to Twisted Soul, a conversation with Professor Tera Hunter and Chef Deborah VanTrece. Tonight's conversation is part of ODUS's Focus series, an interdisciplinary initiative designed to bring anti-racist scholarship, thought, and action to every part of university life. Focus is intended to bring unparalleled expertise, insight, and is considered thought to the difficult but necessary conversations that lie ahead. Tonight's conversation, in particular, is going to be introduced by Wade Rakes. Wade Rakes, class of 2002, will be discussing Princeton's presence in Georgia and welcoming our featured speakers. Wade is a member of the Princeton class of 2002. While at Princeton, he majored in economics with a certificate in political economy and worked in Firestone Library and the Office of the Dean of Undergraduate Students. He was a co-chair at the USG Projects Board and Class Day. A longtime alumni volunteer, Wade is currently class agent, a member of the National Annual Giving Committee, and a member of the President's Advisory Council. Wade returned to his hometown of Atlanta in June of 2020 as CEO of Peach State Health, an organization focused on delivering quality health outcomes for its 1.3 million members in Georgia. Everyone, welcome Wade Rakes.
Thank you so much, Jessica, for that kind introduction. It is my pleasure as a Princetonian and a Georgian to be part of tonight's event. Princeton has long connection to Atlanta, and actually at this moment, that strong connection is evidenced by the fact that both the president of the Alumni Council and chair of the Alumni Association, Rich Holland, class of 1996, and the chair of the Board of Trustees, Weezy Sams, class of 1979, are both Atlantans and Georgians. So it delights me again to be part of tonight's program and to introduce two amazing individuals who we'll hear from. Tera Hunter is the Edwards Professor of American History in the Department of History and in the Department of African American Studies. She has taught courses throughout her career on African American, Southern, labor, and women's history. She's a native of Miami, Florida, where she attended public schools. She received a BA from Duke University and a PhD from Yale University. In 2017, Professor Hunter published Of Bound in Wedlock, Slave and Free Black Marriage in the 19th Century, which was awarded the OAH Mary Nicholas Prize in U.S. Women's and/or Gender History, the AAH Joan Kelly Memorial Prize for Women's History and/or Feminist Theory, and the AAH Littleton Griswold Prize in U.S. Law and Society. In 1997, Professor Hunter published her seminal work, To Joy My Freedom, Southern Black Women's Lives and Labors After the Civil War, which also received several prizes, including the Southern Historical Association's H.L. Mitchell Award. Hunter is a co-editor of Dialogues of Dispersal, Gender, Sexuality, and African Diasporas, and African American Urban Studies, Perspectives from the Colonial Period to the Present. Professor Hunter enjoys collecting and reading cookbooks, discover new recipes to cook for family and friends. We're also joined tonight by Chef Deborah VanTrece. Chef Deborah VanTrece is one of Atlanta's hottest chef personalities, published authors, and creative director, owner of Twisted Soul Cookhouse and Pours and the catering company by VanTrece. The intersection of food and culture is at the heart of VanTrece's cuisine, which features creative modern interpretations and global influences on traditional Southern food. Prior to embarking on her culinary career more than 20 years ago, VanTrece was a flight attendant for American Airlines, where her travels took her to destinations around the world. Her travels had profound influence on her culinary style, which she describes as modern global soul food. Chef VanTrece is a sought-after chef for top food brands and has partnered with top brands such as Belvedere Vodka, Ben & Jerry's, Sabra, Big Green Egg, and others. In March of 2021, VanTrece released her first cookbook, The Twisted Soul Cookbook, Modern Soul Food with Global Flavors. And it's my pleasure to turn it to Chef Deborah VanTrece and Professor Tera Hunter.
Thank you so much, Wade, and thanks to the staff at ODUS for bringing us together. Hello there, Chef Deborah. It's so great to see you. And
it's good to see you also.
Yes. So let's start with your background and where you grew up and how it influenced your ideas about food and your interest in cooking.
I grew up in Kansas City, Missouri. And my whole family cooked. Fathers, grandmothers, grandfathers. Cooking was a source of love for us. I had a strong interest in it. I think because I was an only child, I enjoyed the camaraderie that came with sitting, at the table across from my grandmother while she picked green beans. And just like any grandmother, she was not going to just let me allow me to sit. I'd have to join in. She taught me. At the time, I don't think I realized the importance of what she was teaching me in terms of it being more than just food to nourish us. It was history. It was love. It was food that fed the soul.
And so did you start cooking as a little girl, or did you do it later in life? When did you begin to cook?
I did start cooking as a little girl. I think at the time I felt everyone cooked. Everyone I knew cooked, so I just assumed that that's the way it was outside of my household. Also, it took years before I realized that just was not the case. But I think home economics class in 7th grade is my light bulb memory of really having a strong interest in food. I learned how to prepare a fluffy omelet, and it was something that I was unfamiliar with, and it struck a chord with me and got me motivated to just learn more about food.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I just missed home economics when I was coming through school. We didn't have it. It wasn't required then, but I'm glad you had that opportunity. Can you talk about how you transitioned from sort of learning about cooking in your family and gaining an interest about food in that way and becoming a professional? How did you become, you were a flight attendant in your previous life. So how did you go from being a flight attendant to being a food professional?
Well, I think it started with actual flight attendant training. There's a lot of emphasis, at least back then. Now, of course, you do not get the same service that you did back when I was a flight attendant. I started flying actually in 1984, so that was a while ago. And there was rigorous training in terms of food presentation, wine knowledge. So I learned quite a bit from that, and then actually started flying domestic and going into different regions, different parts of the country, realizing, the heart of the culture, quite often was in the food that was being prepared and served, anywhere you went. From there, I started flying internationally, which that opened, my eyes to a whole lot of things. At one point, I was married, and my husband at the time played basketball overseas. So my experience with food became more than just, a flight attendant or a layover or a tourist, coming to visit. I was actually living in cities and being immersed in the culture. And he moved around quite a bit. So it was a great experience for me because every place I went, I learned a little bit more about food and food systems and the culture of those places that I was at.
And so what made you decide to take up being a chef, a caterer, a restaurant owner full time?
I realized I had a passion for cooking. I loved cooking. I loved tasting new flavors, duplicating, what I tasted. Traveling outside of the country, of course, you're introduced to different spices, different flavors, and I found that real interesting. My favorite pastime became going to the open air markets or to the grocery stores and seeing what I could find to bring back and experiment with. So I cooked at home. I mean, I actually was at a point where I cooked whole meals on airplanes. I traveled with skillets to prepare meals in hotel rooms for my crew. I just had this love for doing that and seeing the smiles on people's faces, when they bite into something really, really delicious. And the flight attendants went on strike. It left me in a very vulnerable position. And at that point, I thought, you know what, this is a perfect time for you to move forward and chase that passion a little bit and go to culinary school. So that's what I did.
Okay, great. So how would you describe the food that is featured in your restaurant as well as in your cookbooks? You've mentioned traveling and how that's impacted your thinking about food. Can you sort of elaborate on the food that you actually cook and the food that you feature in your cookbook?
Well, the term that I use is globally inspired soul food. As I was traveling, I realized that the food that I grew up with had so many negative connotations. It was soul food, African American traditional soul food. That's what I grew up with, and even in culinary school, we learned different cultures and their food, but when it came to the African American food and the food experience, there was about an hour spent on it, and actually the chef instructor turned it over to me for me to try to discuss the merits of African American soul food. While I was traveling, I realized that this food that was shunned and looked down upon in the United States, these ingredients I could find, often, in other countries. And they were revered, thought to be delicacies in those countries. And so it kind of made a connection for me, and inspired me to look at, African American soul food a little bit differently. I think I myself, even at a point, was ashamed to talk about the food that I grew up with. It just seemed like it was dirty, or something was wrong with it. And I decided I wanted to debunk those myths because, these foods, chitlins, oxtails, neck bones, they're coming up in countries all over the world. And why we had decided in the United States to put such a negative connotation on it, is really, it's a part of history. You find bits and pieces, here, and it was really food, and a thought that was used against us, I think, to keep us, down, to keep us from being empowered. So, the food that I do now uplifts that. It uplifts it. It elevates it. It shows connections. It makes comparisons. When I'm doing recipes, I'm thinking about, the upbringing I had, as well as the travels, as well as the formal education that I got in the culinary industry.
Mm-hmm. So when you first came out of culinary school, were you cooking the kind of food that you're cooking now, or did you have to transition to get to that point?
When I first came out of culinary school, I was not cooking the food that I'm cooking now. I still kind of suffered from the mentality of, which a lot of my African American chef sisters and brothers still do, that, I don't want to cook that kind of food. Mm-hmm. It took a while for me to understand the importance of that kind of food. We sometimes think, oh, we're French trained, and you're taught that is the upper echelon, of food is the French cuisine, or actually any cuisine other than, the modest comfort foods that, you'll find across all cultures. But I came to understand that, this food, it has importance. not just for us as African Americans, but to the country. The food in the South, was prepared by slaves, and a lot of this food came out of that was given to the slaves was the cast-offs, the throwaways, and to think that there were slaves that were that knowledgeable and artful in cuisine to take those things and make incredibly delicious and nutritious meals out of them. That's important, and that's a story that should be told. And I proudly serve that type of food. Just make it look a little bit more palatable. Because sometimes it's not the prettiest food. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, exactly. So what's been your journey in terms of, being an African-American woman in an industry that is still, predominated by white men? What's been your experience as an African-American woman coming through culinary school, maybe doing more, classical, what was considered classical French cooking at first, and then becoming, embracing your culture, embracing African-American traditions, and still bucking up against, those other traditions that were considered, more sort of upscale in the culinary world. So what has it been like for you?
The journey has been rough. I'll be very honest. I think one of the positives for me is I didn't really know about the industry when I got into it. I'm coming from, the world of flight attendants, which are dominated by women, and going into something that, to me, it made sense that women would dominate the cooking world, primarily because my knowledge of it was, my mom cooked most of the meals, those traditional male-female roles, and cooking always, was told to me as pretty much being a female role. Once money got put with it, and there was, a monetary thing behind it, that changed. And all of a sudden, men were in the positions and revered in the positions, and, not very welcoming to women at all. There were particular things, if you were in a kitchen, that, men felt that was more suitable for you. Garde-manger, which is cold food, salads, that's typically, where you would find women. You did not find them in executive chef positions. You didn't find them as even line cooks. It was hot behind there, and we were too delicate. So it was an uphill battle and a real, eye opener for me once I really got into the industry. And I was coming from a place where I had never cooked professionally. This was just a dream. So, I think, had I known, I asked myself, would I have still made the decision to do what I did? But we won't know that because, once I was there, I was in, and I was in all the way.
And I know I read an article about some of the experiences that you've had in Georgia as a chef and restaurant owner, and some of the struggles that you had in Decatur in particular that influenced your decision to move to a different part of Atlanta, the metropolitan area. Can you talk about some of those persistent issues around race and perhaps even gender and sexuality biases towards women in the industry, and especially as a Black woman?
Yeah, definitely. When I moved to Decatur, I had been out of the restaurant industry for a while. I was cooking, doing catering. I had clients all over the city. That is how I paid my bills. That's how I made my living. And I'd become a single parent. So I wanted to, spend more time with my daughter, raise her. So at the point where I revisited opening a restaurant again, my daughter was grown. I didn't have to worry about her. And so, I looked and put some fillers out and thought I found a great space. And it was in downtown Decatur. So there's different pockets of Decatur here, and it's Decatur's right next to Atlanta, and Atlanta is such a, great city, and very good city for African American businesses and entrepreneurs. So there was no reason that I thought Decatur would not be the same. But the particular area that I chose, I found out real quick, was really a lot different than what I expected. It seems like a very progressive area, but living and working in it, I realized that this is just not the truth. I got pushback from landlord. I got pushback from other restaurateurs. I was definitely excluded quite often for anything that was going on. And, it's a very strong food-oriented space in downtown Decatur, but nothing that we did or tried to do was looked at welcomingly. It was just, we were not welcome. We were not welcome. We had restaurateurs that were directly across the street. Everything seemed to be very, very good, and until they realized we actually could cook. We were actually good at what we were doing, and people started making comparisons. And that's something that's very natural in any industry. Well, this chef, their food's better. Well, no, that's to be expected. But as professionals, we should not get caught up in that. But it was a definite good old boys club. There were no other Black-owned businesses in the area, let alone, a Black-owned restaurateur, who also happened to be gay. It's like, no, this is just not okay. So, after a year, we decided we needed to get out of there. That was just, it became to the point where I doubted myself. And I'd been doing that, been cooking for 20 some odd years, and doing well with it. And, I was feeling very beat down and very unsure of myself. So I knew it was time to go.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, you've relocated, you have this fabulous restaurant from everything I've heard, and is it East Side Atlanta? And then you decided to go to West Side. You're now on a different adventure, right? You decided that you wanted to write a cookbook that reflects some of the recipes that you feature in your restaurant and many others. Can you talk about, what inspired the cookbook?
The inspiration, really did come from wanting to, uplift comfort food, and wanting to show the connection culturally between, African Americans and anyone else in the world. We so often look for differences, and we don't focus enough to me on, the similarities. And so I wanted a cookbook that showcased a lot of the similarities and, some of the stories that I've heard from all people about, their food, the memories of food, how good it makes them feel. Even people who, have eaten things and, it's brought tears to their eyes because it reminds them of something their mom cooked, something their grandmother cooked. And so that people got even if you haven't traveled, you got a better understanding possibly of the world through my eyes. I get pushback for what I do, not only from people outside of the African American community, but the African American community themselves. They're quick to tell me, this is not soul food. This is not this. This is not that. So with the book, I'm hoping that people understand how my mind works a little bit and how I connect the dots and how, I describe soul food. And understand that it's a personal thing, food and our food journeys, no one's is the same, just like any part of our journeys. Our food journey is not the same either. And this is just my way of connecting the dots and showing what I do, why I do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the things I appreciate is the way you're taking traditional foods, but you're also adding new elements. And one of the things I really like about cookbooks is that they also have a lot of history behind them. Usually you learn a lot about the history of the culture through the food. And so I know that, there have been other African-American women pioneers in the field of food, of, caterers, chefs, restaurant owners, women like Edna Lewis, Leah Chase. Can you talk about those women or any other women who've been pioneers for you, who've been influential in the way that you have developed your career as a chef and restaurant owner?
Oh yeah, definitely. Coming from the Midwest too, I feel like we were in such a little pocket, and my views of the South were not very good at all. So, to move to the South and find out a lot of my ideas of what the South would be were definitely outdated. Some of them were not, but a lot of them were. And once I did get into the food industry, although I didn't particularly have mentors, or when I first got in, I didn't really know anyone who looked like me. As I progressed through my career, then names started coming up. It wasn't that they weren't there, I just wasn't familiar with them. Of course, Leah Chase, been around for years, absolutely incredible story. Had built this, family business. It's been there forever, and, great food, great history, great tradition. And here in Atlanta, there was actually a white male chef named Scott Peacock. And Scott Peacock really kind of thrust a lot of the Black female chefs into the spotlight. Through him, I was able, to meet, some chefs, and get a better understanding of what they were doing, and it was important, and it's things now that are the basis of cooking here in the United States, especially cooking in the South, where we're learning the importance of seasonal ingredients and the use of fresh ingredients, and how to utilize them. And that really kind of came from Edna Lewis, and Leah Chase. There's even now, from a historian side, is Tony Tipton Martin. Anything food history, Tony Tipton Martin. Adrian Miller in Colorado, is doing some incredible things. I mean, it's so many now, but the old school was definitely, Leah and Edna. And there's also a woman, Princess Pamela, that I chuckle about, that was up in New York. And I love reading about her and looking at her recipes also.
So sustainability is sort of a buzzword in the food industry, like it is in so many others now. But what you just referred to in terms of thinking about some of the pioneers like Edna Lewis, they were actually doing practices that we would call sustainability back then, because it's part of African-American culture, the way foods were, like every portion, every part of an animal was used. Like there was very little waste, probably zero waste, in the way that people thought about, what to cook, how to cook it, collecting and growing, vegetables and so on. So can you talk a little bit about how you see sustainability, drawing on those traditional practices from African-American culture, but also perhaps embracing some new practices as well?
Well, I think, if you look at the history of African Americans who were brought here on slave ships, we're doing the grunge work, we're preparing the meals. And then what was given to us was, what no one else wanted. And we we're genius in our ability to figure out, what to do with these things. And it is amazing now as we fast forward that it is the trend, it is the necessity. You are really not considered a great chef if you are not, in tune with sustainable practices. You're just not. We spent years, eating processed food, thinking that it made us better. Even as African Americans, we thought, we had arrived, and we've gone full circle to come back to where it all started, where we are, growing we have gardens, where we're talking to farmers. We are using from the rooter to the tutor, all the way across the board. And it's not just something that was a part of African American culture. It is a part of cultures that were all over Europe, all over Asia. It just was not embraced in the United States. And now it is. Now that, we've, killed off so many animals, and we've, so many things are extinct, or, we can't get a hold of them. Now we're understanding, the damage that we were doing, to our land, to our animals. And if an animal is to be sacrificed, understanding you should eat that whole animal. If you can find a way to use it, then use it. And that's even with vegetables. I mean, we, come up with, things like a papaya skin. You can take the skin and, make a mask out of it. It's just so much you can do. And now it's a trend to do it where, because of a lack of money, there are poor people all over the world that have been using this practice, from the very beginning. And African Americans are some of those people. And it's something that I'm like, we should be proud of it. I think about, all the time, I talk about chitlins. Who thought that, okay, we could actually eat the intestines of a pig, and clean this? It's like just the thought process behind that is amazing to me. And to, it has to be embraced. It has to be embraced. So, now we see some of the food, the techniques, being appropriated, and that's just how it is. But I, ask people, make sure you know the history behind where it comes from, because often here in the South, we'll call it Southern, but we won't call it soul.
Good point. I want to ask you one more question before we open it up for questions from the audience. The pandemic has obviously hit the restaurant industry very hard. Can you talk about how you've adjusted, how it's affected your business, your work as a chef, as a creative? Like, how have you been impacted by the pandemic?
It's been a heck of a year. We have, pivots and pivot and pivot. We've done a 360-degree pivot. I have, during this process, we shut down, we rethought some things, and we came back in first and foremost to help the community. That was, the first thing I really kind of thought of, after realizing, okay, you're in trouble, your business is in trouble. You've worked this hard, and now, wow, okay. But, after that, it was how many people, though, are in worse shape as you work more. They need more than you need. I knew, even if I didn't have the restaurant, I had a roof over my head. I had freezers full of food, but there were people who I didn't know where their next meal was coming from. So, the first thing we did was we fed people. We went from, feeding people free to a pay what you can model. I know a lot of people did GoFundMes, things like that. It was something I was not ready to do at that point. I wanted to, at least have a fair exchange. So if I can feed you, if you can afford to give us more, then give us more. If you can't, then fine, no problem. I just want you to be okay too. And that, understand we're all in this together. We definitely felt like we served food that was not, really good for carry out. We'd never really been a carry out operation. Here and there people would come and ask for something, but that was not something we promoted. And so we did a whole nother concept. I had a concept that I wanted to do in the future that was primarily a carry out concept with chicken. So one day, I came up with that and we opened up as a whole nother business, basically just did a pop up, and put Twisted Soul on hold for a while. And then we got into, more things here with, the killing of Black men and, the civil unrest, the riots. And the thought was, what do we do now? And at that point is when I decided, we had been given the green light here by the governor to open, I think 2 months prior to us actually, deciding to open up our dining room. And we opened it up on Juneteenth as a response to some of the civil unrest that was going on. We thought about, the leaders of our past, Martin Luther King. We thought about, Ralph David Abernathy, John Lewis, the historical restaurants here, such as Pascal's, Busy Bees. I've spent some time with the Pascal's and understanding, how instrumental they were to the civil rights movement, being a gathering spot, a place of positivity, of fellowship. And, I decided we want to become that beacon also. And so we, deliberately set out on Juneteenth as like a renewal to open up our doors, our dining room, and bring people in. Because we have a very diverse clientele and just a place where we could start healing. And so we've been open since Juneteenth of last year. We are open now. We're still at probably 50-60% capacity, but we are doing extremely well to have gone through this year that everyone else has gone through.
That's so wonderful to hear. So I do want to welcome Kriti Kothari on stage, and she's going to moderate the Q&A.
I see I had my mic unmuted, but it's really nice to meet you, Professor Hunter and Chef Deborah. It's been a really enlightening conversation. I'm from Atlanta, so really learned a lot. So I have some questions from the audience to ask. My first question is, can you talk about why Atlanta is such an influential city, not only for food, but also for film and music? And where does that cultural capital really come from, in your opinion?
Being someone who, I at one point considered myself an outsider. I think, and this is really just my opinion. I want to clarify that. I had such bad thoughts about what the South would be like. I grew up in the Midwest, and, you hear, oh, how much better it is. But the difference between, the Midwest and the South is, the South, the racism is blatant usually, it's not undercover. The Midwest is undercover. It exists, but it's undercover. In the South, we are not, at least right now in Atlanta. We've grown to a place where, I have Black neighbors, I have white neighbors. That's not what I came from. I came from true divided lines. If you were white, you live over here. If you're Black, you live over here. If you're Black and live there, you're Black living in a white neighborhood. It's not like that here. And I believe it's because, although we were slaves, we were on the same property. We were living together. So it is really historically a place where, it's not as uncomfortable as where I came from. Because of that, you had people, historically who, came to respect the Black men, the Black women, and their knowledge, and allowed them, because that's what was happening then, allowed them to grow, to prosper. Sometimes it was just in their own communities, but it became natural that it ended up spreading, and as that happened, and you have these historical colleges here, historical universities. This has been going on here for a while. This is not the way it is where I grew up. Even though I thought where I grew up was so much better. It started out, a horrible situation. And it started out where people were running from it, migrating north to get away from it. But those who were left here and made the best of it, and were able to get education here, where Black folks from all over the country were coming here, coming to Black universities, because that's the only place they could get the education. But we got it. And from that, businesses start opening, businesses start flourishing. The circle got bigger. There's more people who are willing to help. When you come here from somewhere else, like I did, you're in awe of what you see African Americans doing, because it was just not the norm from where I came from. And I think even the success I've had here, I don't believe that I would have had that success in Kansas City, Missouri. I won't say I would never have had it, but I think it would have even been more difficult, even though, I had my demons to fight here. It definitely breeds success and creativity. And you come here as an African American, and in my opinion, you get in a space with creatives and you want to create too. It becomes very motivating. And I think that motivation just breeds more success. And that is, what makes Atlanta, such a cool place, at least in my opinion, to be as an African American female.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. Professor Hunter, do you have anything to add to that?
No, we can go to the next question.
Sounds good. The next question I have is, Chef Deborah, since you've lived and traveled all over the world, if you couldn't live and work in Atlanta, where would you like to live and work?
Ooh, that's a hard question now, because of this pandemic. It's difficult, but prior to the pandemic, it would have been outside of the country. I really like Bahia, Brazil. I think that, and even now, if Brazil gets it under control, it is a place where I have strongly considered for years buying a home and having a second home there. So yeah, it would be Bahia.
Yeah, no, that sounds really interesting. Professor Hunter, so much of your research seems to explore the private and domestic lives of enslaved people and Black Americans in the segregated South. Can you talk a bit about the role you see food playing in Black families in the South?
Sure. So food is really crucial to African American history and culture. From the perspective of work, African American women are the people who are actually doing the cooking in the South, especially in the homes of white families. They are doing, everything from everyday cooking to, doing the cooking for celebrations, the cooking for special occasions. And so a lot of what we associate with Southern food actually is, really rooted in African American culture because of the women who are doing the cooking, and they are drawing on a rich array of influences because the South is such a rich place just in terms of where people came from, Africa, from Europe, indigenous people in the Americas. So they're drawing on all of those cultures in the creation of what becomes known as Southern food. And then, of course, food is such an important part of African-American families themselves in terms of like everyday life. It's an expression of both sustenance, it's an expression of love. It's at the center of community life. So there are very, very few events without food. If you think about, you know, African-American history in terms of like church life, family reunions, holiday celebrations, food often is the center. And especially for people who are mostly working class, people who have very few resources, food becomes a way of sharing, a way of communicating a sense of community. So it's been an important part, and it continues to be an important part of African-American history and culture. And women are at the center of that.
Of course. And Chef Deborah, you talked about gender roles and race a little bit earlier with food community. I was just wondering, in the time that you've been a chef, if you've seen any trends changing or any change in gender roles and race and food.
Definitely yes, but you know, I think more movement has been made in the last 8 months than it had been made in the 20 some odd years I've been in the industry. I actually was interviewed probably 2 years or so ago. The food editor for the Atlanta Journal and Constitution did a piece on the lack of African Americans in a African American city in the food industry. She, you know, got here and was just a little bit surprised by that. And this same food editor, you know, I've spoken to in the last couple of months, and they just ran another feature on, you know, for the first time, how many Black chefs, how many African American chefs, you know, are now at the helm of some of the top restaurants here in Atlanta. You know, so there is movement. You know, there's movement with, you know, African Americans, and there's movement with women. You know, only because we have fought so hard, and now the attention is on. And you know, hopefully it continues. You know, I hope this is just not something that will, you know, pass, and we'll continue to do the work and put people in places where they should be, regardless of who they are.
Yeah, definitely. The pandemic there's a lot that has happened, but there's a lot of good stuff that has come out of it as well.
Yes.
My next question is, Chef Deborah, there are many strong opinions on the way certain foods must be made. What is a hot take that you have on a traditional soul food classic that would shock us?
Wow. I got to think, because there's so many. There's so many. You know, there's a cookbook full of them. I think one of the things which is so simple that I do, and it's a signature item. It's that one thing I've done that if I ever see it, when anyone sees it, they know that this is where it came from, that I'm the only one that had come up with this. And it's called the collard green roll. And basically it is, you know, it's greens that are braised. I like to mix greens. You know, I think greens are kind of regional also in soul food. I didn't grow up with collard greens. It's, you know, I got to the South, that's all they were talking. I grew up with mustard and turnip and, you know, spinach and kale. But in the South, it was collard greens. And I mix them up and I cook them in a traditional way. You know, they're slow cooked, you know, they're seasoned up, they're braised, you know, maybe add fat to them, maybe not, meat, maybe not. But I take the big leaf of the collard, I blanch it. I then take the greens that I've cut up and braised, I drain them, and then I put the greens inside of the leaf and I roll it like a grape leaf. and I present it like a little egg roll, and that would be the one that just, and then I serve it with the pot liquor, or the cooking liquid that it's cooked in, for anyone who doesn't know what pot liquor is. Use it as a dip, like a au jus, if you will. That it seems to shock. It's so simple, but it is, it's taken the city by storm. When chefs see it done, they're just, it's kind of the light bulb. Why didn't I think of that moment? And it really was a conscious thought that I had about the grape leaves in Greece. And if they can do this, why couldn't I do something similar with greens? So that is probably the most notable one single thing. And I came up with it on opening my first restaurant in 1998, and I have stuck with it. And that would be that signature one item that people just don't expect.
And I would say
Definitely,
that collard greens is one of those foods that can be very controversial in terms of, very traditional approaches. You have to have the pig, the fat back, the pork in the cooking of the greens. Others have transitioned to turkey, smoked turkey. I've done it vegetarian style, and I would just say family and friends were suspect about it until they actually tasted it and were sold, because you can't actually make good greens without meat. But not everybody believes that.
What was their reaction when they tried it?
They love it. They love it.
Yeah.
There are ways of seasoning it. Smoked paprika is one of those spices that really gives that smokiness. And it's a very simple spice. It's one of my favorite spices. It gives it that almost that porky kind of
smokiness that you would get from that fat. Yeah. And we that's what we do. We use that and bay leaves, and then often we smoke like mirepoix. So we smoke the onions, we smoke the vegetables that go in it, and we use that to imitate that smoky flavor that you get from fat back or smoked ham hocks or whatever you traditionally use.
Yeah.
On that note, I have a question for you, Professor Hunter. What is your favorite place to eat at in Princeton? Or what would you like to see come to Princeton if you don't have a favorite?
Oh, my favorite place to eat in Princeton. I would say Agricola. The restaurant Agricola is my favorite. I would like to see more. I would love to have a really good Vietnamese restaurant in Princeton. We have some new Thai restaurants. We don't have a lot of really, really good Asian food, and Vietnamese especially, and also Korean. I would love to have a really good Korean restaurant here. So more ethnic foods would be great. We have nice restaurants. We don't have as many sort of, more casual restaurants that has, restaurants that have really, really good food at a more moderate level.
I definitely agree. And I think we're actually, I know in the last year I've been virtual, but I've heard there's been a lot of changes to the restaurant landscape in Princeton. So excited to try it as well. But yeah, no, I'd love to see a Vietnamese restaurant. Chef Deborah, I have a similar question for you. In the area, like, how would you like to see the restaurant industry grow or change?
In terms of cuisine, I think Atlanta's doing a real good job of covering it. It's getting better and better by the day. I'm listening and thinking, we've got some great, Vietnamese restaurants now. We've got great areas of town that house very authentic, foods. But, I think I would like to see more movement. I don't want to see it contained to one area. If you want good Asian, you go to Chamblee. If you want good Mexican, you go Buford Highway, or you can get some Asian on Buford Highway. I want it to be, I can go, in any part of town and find great restaurants, that show the cultural map of Atlanta, and not just always be focused on one side of town. I think that perpetuates stereotypes, even with, soul food. It's, you can go to this part of Atlanta and they're, plentiful, but, there's other parts of Atlanta where, it's almost, you feel unwelcome, you feel like you don't fit into the box. You're not supposed to be here. So I would just like to see, a little bit more change in real estate and location, where we see a more diverse group of restaurants that are all over the place.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I've seen it myself, that there are just blocks in Atlanta of different cultures, which is great, but bringing those blocks together is something that we need to move towards. I have another question for you, Chef Deborah. It's, who has better barbecue, Kansas City or Atlanta?
Kansas City.
No question, hands down.
No question, hands down, hands down. It's I've been in Atlanta for 30 something years, and I am still on the search. Every time something new opens, I think maybe this is the one. But I think hands down, Kansas City.
Yeah, I have not tried. So I'm actually vegetarian, so I have not tried either, but I'll take your word for it. It's a resounding yes for Kansas City.
Hands down.
Yeah, we've talked about this a little bit, but I think moving forward, what is the, if you had any advice for a female chef of color, starting their own restaurant, what would your advice be? How to navigate the space from your own experiences as well?
I think, well, now it's a little bit different. And what I find too often is chefs overall, including, female, African-American male, just across the board. We've gotten very caught up in the celebrity of it all. And instead of focusing so much on how many likes you're getting on Instagram and, how many followers you have, is understanding the business aspect of it. Sometimes I think now we're losing focus. We're losing focus. If you're wanting to get into this, it's a business. It's not, a rock show. It's a business, and it needs to be planned out. It needs thought. You have to have all your ducks in a row. You have to understand how to make money, with it. And growing followers is not always the answer. And that's something that I have to, I mentor a lot. And that is one of the biggest things that, it's not saying that, the social media channels are not important from a marketing standpoint, but becoming a celebrity, will not get you where you need to go. And I've watched, several businesses open, on and do really well on the basis of celebrity. And then we find out what you did to get to that celebrity status, and then you fall, and you lose your credibility, So, my biggest advice is to understand how the business works and focus on that, focus on the talent, the celebrity will come. You know, if you're that good, it's going to come.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. We have time for one more question, and my last question is actually going to focus on something that you talked about a little bit earlier, briefly, cultural appropriation and food. I was wondering if you could speak more to cultural appropriation and food and what the impact of it is like what the impact of it is.
I think, you know, it happens. It's going to happen. All right. You know, what I think is wrong is when you don't give credit where credit is due, when you don't do the work, when you don't do the history. What I do is I borrow from other cultures, you know, but for me, it's to pay homage to those cultures. And I want you to know where I got it from. I don't claim it as my own. You know, I didn't come up with, you know, a hoisin, you know, hoisin sauce. I have oxtails with hoisin on them, but I didn't come up with hoisin sauce. That's not a part of what I grew up with. That's not a part of my culture. You know, and I want people to understand and know where it does come from. And I think that's what's important. You know, the space of food is going to continue to evolve. It should, you know, as more talented chefs come, as more science is known about food and the growth of food, and you know, as we play with different spices and you know what's happening all across the globe, the world of food will change. You know, it's going to continuously change, but it will not change pretty much unless we are borrowing from each other. But understand, it's a borrow. You know, it's not a take. It's a borrow. And you know, I think you're doing yourself an injustice, and also, you know, cultures of people when you don't do the research and you don't let it be known. This is where that comes from. You know, because and it happens a lot. I hope people will start getting away from it. Chefs, I think they're getting called out so much on it that you know they are either shying away from it altogether, you know, or making it known this was my inspiration behind this, you know, and this is who it is. You know, for me, you know, as an African American that is, you know, a descendant of slaves, it does offend me when, you know, I'm constantly hearing from my white male counterparts that, you know, this is your grandmother's recipe, you know, and if we do the history behind you, your grandmother wasn't the one cooking. It was your grandmother's slave that was cooking and came up with this. That's not your grandmother's recipe, you know, and know that history and say it, you know, say it. And I think we all will have a lot more respect for you.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Definitely, it's something that everyone needs to be more cognizant of.
Yes.
That's all of the questions that we have today, but I wanted to invite Jessica Bailey on for closing remarks. Thank you so much for talking today. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you.
I'm going to do the whole thing again because I was muted. Love the virtual life. So Thank you, Professor Hunter and Chef VanTrece, for this inspiring conversation. Thank you to Kriti for your beautiful moderation, and thank you to Wade for your introductions of our speakers. And last but not least, thank you all, dear audience, for tuning in and spending some time with us this Friday evening. Our next focus event will be a conversation on race and religion with Professor Judith Weisenfeld and Pastor Eric Manning on Tuesday, May 11th at 5 p.m. We hope you will join us again, but until then, have a safe and relaxing evening, everyone, and take care.